Hi guys, I hope you're doing well. My name is John, the career coach. As usual, I'm back again with another podcast. Today we want to talk about careers in tech. What are some of the things that you need to be thinking about if you're looking to, get a promotion or transition from tech to consulting? And with me, I have my guest today, Felix Ochoro. He's going to introduce himself and tell us who he is, what he does, and then we'll take it up from there. Karibu sana, Felix.
Thank you, Joanne. Such a privilege to be here and to be a part of this conversation that's important, just from many different perspectives for individuals looking to transition through different stages of career. But also an interesting fact is that, this is my first podcast ever. And so...
How does it feel?
Different. One would imagine that, I'd have done tons of this in the past.
Yeah.
But
right.
So this is special. It's a first. So my name's Felix Ochoro. I'm the managing partner at Andage Consulting. We're a consulting firm that focuses on digital transformation. So helping organizations, sort of take their bricks and mortar business, create a proposition, and drive this through digital channels. And so happy to be here.
Super. So to start us off, maybe you could tell us how the journey has been, your career journey. I don't know at what point you'd want to start and how you eventually transitioned to now becoming managing a partner at Edge.
At Edge. Okay. So I think we can sort of take it chronologically, right?
All right.
And one of the things, whenever I sort of think about career journeys, there's many different approaches, different frameworks. But one that I'd want to sort of use to guide this conversation is one of seasons.
Okay.
So if you sort of think about career seasons, and that different seasons are characterized by different sort of things, you're focusing on different things in different seasons. I think that sort of is one of those that sort of helps to frame the conversation. So I'd probably start with my early career, and so I started engaging in technology initially as a hobby. So stumbled on technology as something that I would take up for work, and this is because, fairly early on, I had the privilege of having, access to tech resources when tech resources were not as available. My dad, who was, an economics professor at the time, was into statistics, so studying an area of his discipline, and then really struggled like every person his age with the tech, and so I got into tech, helping him build models, and so he would sort of figure out what the math was, and I would help him build the models for it. And then what happens is then he sort of elected to volunteer me to his mates at the university, and so what happens is one of my earliest gigs was then, building models for a particular person in faculty at the engineering school.
Okay.
And what we did was we cut a deal and traded off, this for compute time. So I would access their lab, and work for free.
Okay.
So that was very early on.
So at this point, are you in campus?
No. I'm actually in my gap year, just getting ready to go into campus.
Oh.
And so that's where it all sort of began, and then transitioned into uni. Elected to stay in the world of work, and so worked part-time. There was an emergence of sort of the early stage internet companies, and so there was a lot of demand for talent in particularly in the communications infrastructure space. And so took on my first job in my first year of campus, and so that was fairly interesting, because had the balance between, you know, paying attention to academia, keeping a full-time job, and then was actually doing, you know, some part-time courses as well at the same time, and so running a fairly full schedule. That would then transition to be sort of my first, you know, post-campus job. Graduated out of campus to the role of CTO.
Okay, so yes. Wait a minute. So what degree did you do?
So I actually did an undergrad in physics, so majored in physics.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if anyone who is watching is studying physics and not IT, you know, there's still hope that they can transition.
Yes, in fact, what's interesting, and this is advice I got when I was fairly young. At the time, I was looking to change around my courses, and sitting with Dad, he mentioned the value of understanding the fundamentals of a particular industry, and talked about how physical sciences give you a foundation to go out and do careers in technology.
Right.
And so when you think about, for example, the emergence of artificial intelligence as an area, the most important skill when you think about going into AI as a career is actually math. And so a strong math background will position you to play in computer science in this regard. And so one of the realities I find with technology is that technology is very multidisciplinary. A lot of people look at tech from the lens of, for example, software engineering, which is sort of a very natural, but very narrow perspective to the industry. And so when you think about the idea that technology plays the role of solving a problem in society, that very notion means that, you know, you always have to come with some sort of knowledge about the problem set and how to solve the problem set. And so what happens is when you think about, you know, machine learning, there's, you know, the idea that you're creating models, and a lot of that mathematical model sort of then derives from, you know, a strong understanding of algebra, for example, and so on. But then what happens is you find that is also true of most of industry. So when you actually go into tech careers, you also want to take the time and invest in understanding an industry and an industry problem that you're going to be going out to solve. So whether, you know, you see a lot of activity in payments, that's a subset of financial services. But for one to be successful, you've got to sort of wager and sort of, you know, invest in acquiring industry skills. So understand a particular industry, understand what the problem is that the industry is going to try solve, and then, you know, bring the skills, whether, you know, cloud computing, artificial intelligence, software engineering to that problem set. Okay. So studying physics, working in IT, right? So that was your life at that particular moment. That was my life. Right. Okay. Yes. Then now after campus. So I graduated out of campus, and at the time, the organization was going through a transition. I'd acquired a fair bit of experience. So applied and was interviewed and accepted as the chief technical officer of this organization. Okay. So graduating out of campus into a C-level job was interesting. That's what I wanted to ask. How did that happen? Yeah, so I think two or three things. One of the things I sort of recognize, and this then goes back to the concept of seasons, right? So in my first season of career, one of the things I found important was this idea that one would take the mindset that learning was the big thing about that season. And so what that means is that I traded off, for example, opportunities to earn more in the interest of learning.
While you're still in campus.
While I was still in campus.
Okay.
So one of the things I didn't mention was, at the time, when I got into my first career engagement, this was in past year, had the opportunity to work for a tech firm, but also applied and had been chasing up this job to do some part-time work in a bank. And when the two opportunities opened, they opened up incidentally probably about a month, maybe 2 months of each other. And I elected to take the opportunity in tech. The banking job was sort of paying six and a half times the tech job, but then it's just to sort of recognize that where was the opportunity to really learn and grow. One of the things I also recognize is when you're young, you have the opportunity to in fact, what I did learn was how to be comfortable making mistakes. So I tried a lot of things, worked across the organization, took up assignments, at will, really stretched myself, made a lot of mistakes and learned through the process. And so 4 years into career, I felt like I'd acquired the breadth of skill, not so much depth in every area, but I'd started to deepen in certain areas to actually lead a business division.
Right.
And so what happens is when I met with the general manager and had this conversation, they sort of felt confident, giving me that responsibility. So it was a bit of a risk on their part.
Yeah.
But I think the learning is, early in career, recognize that learning, opportunities to learn and grow are sort of where you want to sort of invest and so don't be too caught up with does this pay well. If there's an internship opportunity and they don't have cash to pay for it, take it up and take the learning. I know that's a bit of a controversial issue with young people these days.
I know.
But
and it's interesting that so your how you are able to learn the IT was from building the models for your dad, right? So that is where you so would you say it was most of it was self-taught?
Yes. So one of the interesting things I find with technology, as with a number of disciplines, is that you learn by doing. So yes, I read a lot in the season, and taught myself a lot about tech.
Okay.
But the other interesting thing I find is that, and initially I think it came out of just the fascination amongst my friends. A lot of people wanted to learn what I was learning. So I had a lot of requests, to teach. And one of the things I learned was that the best way to learn a thing is to actually commit yourself to teaching it. And so to be open and share what you're learning with other people, I think is just sort of one of the best ways to really internalize a subject. So I taught a lot, and in so doing, learned a lot as well.
Okay.
Took on some professional education as well, and so to just help put a lot of structure to what I was learning.
Yeah.
And I know at times there's always this debate between, formal education versus, sort of teaching yourself things. There tends to be a bit of a risk in that dichotomy because it almost creates the picture that, you either do one or the other.
Yeah.
I think one can do both.
Okay. So CTO immediately
Yes.
after campus, then, how was that and what was the next thing after that?
Yeah, so what happens is it's interesting because one of the things I learned very quickly was that career seems to be stacked up. It's a little like you're climbing different ladders, right? And this ladder's leaned against this wall, and the things that you need to actually succeed are very different than what you need to succeed in the next stage. So, if I think about it this way, that, you've got this ladder leaned against this wall and you've gotten to this point, and then you've got to climb, in the opposite direction, and now you've got to climb a ladder in the opposite direction. Up until then, I was successful as an individual contributor, right? And now all of a sudden, in my early 20s, I needed to figure out, how do I get to achieve results through teams, through people, and then had to go through the growth in figuring out how to sort of mentor teams, how to coach, how to motivate, keep people engaged, empower. Still had some responsibilities as an individual contributor, but had to retool. And so that was a fascinating season. Again, took to books, spent a lot of time reading in that season, and remembered something that I'd been told growing up, that if you wanted to learn about anything, then it was a little time, consistency, doing it doing it very consistently over a long time, then you'd sort of wrap your head around it. So put aside just an hour a day, and I've been reading an hour a day ever since, but it was I just found myself able to retool in that season.
Okay. Just if you could just highlight two things on leadership, because you found yourself in a position of leadership in your early 20s, and you're able to read on leadership. What two tips would you give anyone who has found themselves in that position? They are managing a team, they now need to lead and grow and motivate a team, and I know it can be a little bit dicey when you're balancing both being an individual contributor and motivating, encouraging and building teams and growing the teams. What two tips would you give us?
So two tips. I think one of the things I learned early on is that leadership's very situational. And so what happens is, I sort of had a team and needed to know who the individuals were, what their needs were, and then to manage them as individuals. And so what happens is, if you think about it, it's very much like having, a golf set, and, there's a place where you use, a driver, and then there's a place where you use, a 5-wood, etc. And it's just bringing up different tools to managing each relationship, and then being very intentional and very present in every one of those engagements. A lot of times I think you've got to sort of straddle between a task orientation and a people orientation. And a lot of times I find that if you're to err in the direction of people, being compassionate, getting to really understand people, and supporting their growth. Because what happens is, a lot of times it's easier to measure and to manage the task things, to sort of hold people accountable, etc. But that balance I thought was important. The second thing is who you are matters. It's a bit of a complicated one, but a lot of times I think we look at management as, this thing that you've got to crack and you've got to figure out how to work a system. What I've found is that, if you invest in just building yourself from a character perspective, then, people follow good people.
Right. So now tell us about the transitioning now from corporate to and Edge, and also tell us about Yellow. So first of all, how was the transition like, and what led to you now saying that I need to branch out from from corporate?
So I had a number of interesting transitions. So the first was from this small company, and it was a company that had gone through a growth phase. And so very much a startup by every definition, trying to build systems, structure, an organization, de-risk the business in many regards, and then had, the privilege of sitting with the board and structuring, an exit, and an exit in the sense that, the board of this company was going to then sell the company. And so went into some work around the mergers and acquisition space. That was some good learning, and then transitioned out of this role. So starting, an early stage company, going through a growth phase and going through an exit, the sale of a business. Then went into the not-for-profit. Actually went and did a stint at the United Nations. So that was my first transition. And that was very interesting because, when you think about, large organizations, small organizations, and what that distinction is, I think one has to recognize that, when you actually work in smaller organizations, you get a lot of breadth. You get to do a lot of different things, mostly because, small organizations do not have large teams, etc. And so you take on a lot of responsibility. When I started to move into larger organizations, first the United Nations, then eventually transitioned out of that into a large telecommunications vendor, and then spent a season at Ericsson, almost a decade, and then transitioned to IBM. Is this idea that larger organizations then initially sort of constrain you a lot more in terms of just the areas of responsibility, etc.
Right.
And so one of the things I found was that you sort of it's a little like climbing down from this ladder to get up a different ladder.
No, I think I get that, like what you're trying to say earlier.
Yes, and the reality I found was that in both organizations I sort of had the privilege of having the opportunity to grow into management in the different organizations, picked up different skills along the way, and took on international assignments, worked across very large territories. At some point had a 17 country coverage for one of the businesses, and then just felt about 2 years ago that it was time to transition and to basically do a different thing, and it was informed by a number of factors. We had some illness in the family, and so I needed to be close home. So came back from an international assignment, spent some time in that season in Nairobi, and then just sort of recognized that I needed to make that trade-off and be closer home. But also felt that it was time to do something different. One of the things I've found is that, within, one's career, I find that there is, when you think about, growth as a concept, you're always sort of at the beginning of a new hill. And, when you get into a new industry, a new organization, the early part tends to be sort of, very gentle growth when you think about it. So whenever you transition, a lot of people say that, it takes you about 6 months to settle into a new organization, even when you know the industry, the clients, you understand, the workings of it, just to adapt to, the people, the culture, processes that are unique to every organization. And so, you tend to find that there's that season when you're sort of going through a lot more learning. And then one of the things I always found with transitions, and I'll maybe talk about what this has been, is that you get to a bit of a steep learning curve, and then you really start to find that, when you've actually done your early seasons well, when you've really gotten to understand the fundamentals of technology, how industry works, and so on, then you find that you're very quickly able to transition between this season of learning and the season when you're productive, and so that tends to be, to my mind, the second season of career. I'd call it that season of productivity, where you're sort of really, almost effortlessly, producing work output.
Right.
And then what happens is you get to a place where you're really starting to tail off. A lot of people call this thing the S curve because it looks a lot like an S, but a funny S lying down-ish. And so what happens is when you get to the top of it, then what you find is that you're starting to feel unchallenged, right? I mean, work's very familiar. And at times, the reality is one can create opportunities for themselves to, within organizations, go out, take on new challenges, take on different roles and ride that curve. But at times it just means that, when you get to that point in your career, it's a place where you've got to assess and figure out, is it time for a transition? Because that tends to mark transitions as well, where you sort of have almost plateaued, you're not as challenged and so on. And so I felt that that's where I was at the beginning of that season, and then took on, this grand challenge, engaged, a number of co-founders and went out and set up this business, Handage.
Okay.
And so that came with its fair share of learnings.
Tell us a little bit about that. How has it been now, transitioning out?
Yes. So I think two things. Entrepreneurship is always an interesting journey. Requires a lot of patience, a lot of grit. I think what I find is that when one does the entrepreneurship sort of journey late in career, there's two or three things that sort of present as an advantage, and it's this idea that you somewhat have figured out the basics of running a business,
right?
So you understand finance, you understand people, you understand
the industry,
a fair bit
even
about an industry that you're going to go after. You understand the technology, and you understand how to build product, and so on. So those piece parts, and a lot of times I think even for those that that take on entrepreneurship early in life, is find a way to bridge for those gaps.
Okay.
And one of those ways could be take a job in an enterprise, and really do the learning very deliberately through that season. A different way could be finding mentors, people who have walked the journey further down the road and are sort of able to navigate you. Later in career, you find you've got a lot of those skill sets.
Okay. Sorry, a quick one.
Sure.
Do you think it's more advantageous if you transition late in career as opposed to early? Do you think the transition was easier because you transitioned later, as opposed to if maybe you had transitioned out a decade ago or 5 years ago?
So it's interesting. I think both present their unique set of challenges, right? I think I always talk to my good friends that took on that journey a lot earlier, and it's clear that a big part of entrepreneurship is risk, right?
Right.
When you're much younger, you've got the ability to take a lot more risk,
right?
Because
the appetite is high.
It's high. You can make mistakes. You can bounce back
right.
Out of those mistakes a lot easier. You don't have commitments. You
right.
probably don't have family to take care of. So from that perspective, a lot of people, once you actually get into career in corporate, it's actually very easy. It's very bold to actually then take the decision and try to take on an entrepreneurial journey, because what happens is, very often you've figured out how large corporations work. And one of the interesting things is that you find that, what you sort of find when you actually start to build a business is that you don't have a lot of for example, capital.
Right.
It's a big problem for
young people.
Yes, as you start off, a business early on. But what I find is that when you think about what that distinction is, when you're much older, you sort of have been able to build a bit of a capital base, but you also have a lot more responsibility. I think so. When you think about what your runway is, you might have a little longer runway because you sort of thought about this, invested, and put aside this whatever, but then your appetite for risk is lower because there's a lot more at stake. A lot of times, when you're mid-career, you also sort of are, in the thick of it with family and so on. And so those sorts of things make it very difficult for people to make that jump later on. What I find though is that statistically, older founders tend to be statistically more successful. And when you actually look at, a lot of successful entrepreneurs, the idea that they had a career and done a lot of the learning sort of allows them to figure out what the risks are. But then it's also certain things, it's that you've got probably a lot more networks in industry. And so you're sort of able to leverage those networks a lot more naturally. And so so I think I wouldn't say that there's such a thing as the right time. I think it's just to understand that when you don't have experience, find someone. A board of advisors is probably a good bet when you want to sort of take on this journeys early. Get people who will sort of be your sponsors, get you networks, help you raise capital, and so on and so forth. And so that tends to de-risk this when you don't really know what you don't know. When you're older, I think it's a bit of a tougher one, right? Because a lot of times you're telling people move from the comfort of a corporate career and transition into the turbulence that entrepreneurship is.
Great. So as parting shot, Felix, or what can you tell us about 3 tips? Because of course you have been in the tech IT space for a very long time. The ins and outs. As as someone who's employed, but then also as someone who is running your own enterprise, and you have hired across the year. So what would you tell someone who is thinking of growing in this tech space, in terms of what are certain things they need to have under their belt when they're thinking about progressing in tech, in a tech career?
Okay, so I don't know, that's an interesting question, and one that probably could have 10 distinct answers. But let me just step back to give context to the point of view. So right now we live in very interesting times, and when you actually think about what's going on in the world around us at a macro level, it's this idea that the world is moving, and every company is becoming a technology company in every form or shape. Whether you think about the emergence of neobanks out of the financial services banking industry, you see a lot of activity in payments in this marketplace. The move of insurance to digital insurance. I mean, every one of these companies,
even Mama Mboga now is thinking about how to keep their records.
Correct.
Joan Winning CV, we are thinking about how do we make our process easier. So it's actually everyone now.
Correct. Correct. And so what happens is, and this is actually sort of unprecedented, because a lot of the drivers, the things that are driving this change are, of course, that we're living in an increasingly complicated world, and that has sort of put us under a lot of pressure to start to find solutions. A lot of people argue that the pandemic, for example, has accelerated the emergence of Yes, correct.
Yeah, it's catapulted us. I think where we are now, we would have been maybe 4 years, 5 years.
Correct.
But then I think it just catapulted us to the future.
100%, Joanne.
Yeah.
So these things that are actually, part of the reality is that when new challenges arise, then, humanity puts its back into it and tries to find new solutions. But then a big part of it is also that there's been the emergence of a lot of new technologies. So, when you think about, for example, machine learning and artificial intelligence, that's, an industry that's sort of existed within the confines of computer science for over 50 years. But, the fact that, cloud computing has made available, computing resources for people to start to play in this space and be able to do interesting work. I mean, it's interesting. We are a fairly young company. We've got an AI-enabled platform that's enabled us to do risk selection and risk-based pricing, very much, sort of things that were perceived to be very difficult to do. So for people who want to sort of, go out and be successful, it's to actually look at this emerging technology trends and then sort of take the investment and learn what these technologies are about.
Right.
And, so whether, getting into data science, cloud computing, blockchain and just sort of this technologies that underpin the platforms that are going to change the world going forward.
Right.
And so what that means is just that you're going to, for those that are going to be successful, it's a question of retooling.
Yes.
So just creating a culture, and one of the realities is it's not one of those things that's very difficult to do. Like I mentioned, for me, it's been an hour a day, consistently over a career, and you, one can actually build breadth as well as depth at the same time. It's not an either or.
Yeah.
It's something that one can go after.
Right. Yeah, and I think also because in our universities, they don't consult industry. So like we are having so many graduates who, like for example, if you wanted to hire, some IT professionals, and like you put out like an advert, the people who apply probably don't have the exact skills that you need. And I like what you're saying about then being intentional about the learnings, finding what the problems are, and then now working backwards to say, okay, maybe this company needs a data analyst, so can I go and study the data, analytics, whether it's a course or it's an online learning, as opposed to that what we know traditionally, like you go to campus and you do an IT. Because I think there are so many people who are graduating, but then with a degree that they're not being able to use.
To sort of put to use. Yeah, and I think I agree with you. There's an opportunity there for industry and academia to team together. I think it was interesting. I was talking to a good friend about a month ago, and they were caught in the middle of a talent discussion, talking about the scarcity of talent. I think sort of one of the tick-outs out of that conversation was that industry's got to do a better job of engaging with academia, even as we call on academia to sort of think about thematically, structuring their courses so that they're addressing current problems. So I agree. There's an opportunity to collaborate. Okay. But also, when you think about people mid-career, a lot of those people that are having to go through this retooling that have been in industry for a while, I think there's also an opportunity at a personal level for individuals to sort of say, you know what, let me take some people and mentor them through these new things that I'm learning. Right. Because when you actually teach, then you sort of really internalize. And so last year took on, a varsity course, taught a course in blockchain at one of the local varsities. And, in the preparation, doing some of the prep around the project work, really got to wrap my head around, the different use cases for blockchain.
Okay.
So that's something else I would sort of recommend.
All right.
Yeah.
Great. So thank you very much, Felix, for for coming to this podcast, for everything that you've shared. I personally have learned so much. I think I'll need like maybe 30 minutes to just internalize everything that we have discussed. I hope the podcast has been beneficial. Thank you very much for watching, and see you next time. Bye bye.